All right, let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start taking a look at escape, avoidance, and punishment. And this is chapter 9, but we're continuing on with the operational conditioning and just seeing other sides of and complexities to this particular form of learning. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at one aspect or one interesting effect of extinction and stimulus control, which is the peak shift effect. And we're also going to introduce the idea of punishment, specifically by taking a look at some forms of punishment. And then next class, we're going to be taking a look at some of the things to be aware of if you're using punishment, side effects that we need to be aware of if we decide to go down that road. All right, so the first thing we're going to do though is take a look at extinction and stimulus control. So specifically stimulus control and the peak shift effect. So hopefully you remember Felix Baumgartner here. So a little while ago we introduced this individual. He was the one that skydove from outer space. He was the one that raised money and funding, got Red Bull to sponsor him, and basically jumped out into our atmosphere, plummeted to Earth, broke the sound barrier, and ended up landing safely. So, anyways, the question here that we're going to ask and we're going to try to answer now is, why did he ever want to jump from outer space? So why would he even want to do that? And especially important is this question, considering he had never done it before. So it's one thing to understand why somebody would want to do a behavior if they have been reinforced for that particular behavior. So when we were looking at Harry and his self-abusive behavior, it became a lot easier to understand his self-abuse when we understood that he was negatively reinforced for using his self-abuse. So he was negatively reinforced for self-abuse. So when he wanted to self-abuse, it was easy to understand. He'd been rewarded before, reinforced. Of course, he's going to want to do that particular behavior. But Felix Baumgartner was the first person to ever skydive from outer space. And yet he really wanted to skydive from outer space. So we're going to take a look at why would that stimulus, that signal of, hey, here's outer space, why would that be something that he would find particularly attractive? Why would that be something that he would actively try to approach? And speaking of things that we actively try to approach, speaking of things that we find attractive, we're also going to take a look at physical attraction. So once again, this is an example of things that people find attractive. Notice that word there, attractive, things that people actively try to get near. And one of the kind of questions to answer is that very few people have ever been reinforced for some of the physical features that our society finds particularly attractive. So just statistically, abs like this do not occur very often. And just statistically, just looking at the numbers, most of us do not have reinforced behaviors with these particular abs. All right, so Ryan Reynolds here has a body that most of us have not been reinforced for engaging with. Ryan Gosling, also same thing. You know, so I just like to point out both of those guys are from Canada, my home country. It's one of our main exports. Hot guys named Brian. But anyways, these types of bodies we find attractive, but we haven't been reinforced for interacting with them, mostly because we haven't interacted with them. And if you don't believe me, go to the beach this summer and just count how many people pass by that look like this. And also count how many people pass by that look like this. So the question is, why do people find these particular types of physical stimuli attractive, even if they have never been reinforced for interacting with these stimuli, for the simple point that they're extremely, extremely rare? So we're going to answer those questions today. Why is it that people are attracted to certain behaviors, even though they have never been reinforced for interacting with those behaviors? maybe even if they have never encountered those particular behaviors at all. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today, and we're going to answer that with a look at the peak shift effect. So the peak shift effect is an answer to the question of why is it that certain stimuli cause us to want to engage in certain behavior. So when we take a look at stimulus generalization, before we get to the peak shift effect, we got to take a look at stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization is the tendency, in this case, for in operational learning, is the tendency for a certain behavior to be emitted in the presence of a stimuli that is associated or similar to the stimulus for reinforcement, the antecedent for reinforcement, the discriminative stimulus, that's the word I'm looking for. It's going to be one of those days. I had a hard time finding falsely, I think it was before. Anyways, the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. So just to backtrack, just so that we're all on the same page, remember that we had discriminative stimuli, which indicated whether a behavior would end in reinforcement. We had a discriminative stimulus for punishment to indicate whether a behavior would end in punishment. So the classic example, driving through an intersection. This is a red light. You drive through an intersection during a red light. The red light is a stimulus indicating that you will be punished for driving through that intersection, either with a driving violation or with an accident. Green light, discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. Drive through the intersection, you will be reinforced by getting where you are on time. So this discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, followed by the behavior, by the operant behavior, that then causes the reinforcer. So that's what we're looking at. What is that effect of that discriminative stimulus for reinforcement? So what we find, much like in classical conditioning, is that if you train an organism on a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, the behavior that is reinforced while that discriminative stimulus is there will have the highest response. So when you have that discriminative stimulus, the behavior that was trained to that discriminative stimulus will have the highest amount of response. So if the discriminative stimulus was this tone here, this 2000 hertz tone, and in this case this is a rat, the rat was, during that tone, a bar press was reinforced with food. So if this is a situation, we have a 2000 hertz tone indicating that during that time, this is like the green light, a bar press will be reinforced with food. If that's the case, then when we play that 2000 hertz tone, that rat will go there and it will start pressing that bar. It will press the bar, fully expecting to be reinforced for that particular behavior, because the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement is present. However, much like in classical conditioning, where you rang the bell and the dog started to salivate, and then you rang a different bell and the dog still salivated, it just salivated a little bit less, if you present stimuli that are similar to the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, they will also, the organism will also emit the behavior. They'll also, in this case, bar press. Now they do bar press less, but they still bar press. So that is stimulus generalization. That's evidence of stimulus generalization. You play the original tone, the rat will bar press. You play a slightly higher tone, one that the rat has never heard before, the rat will still bar press. Slightly less, but it'll still bar press. And then the further away from that original discriminative stimulus for reinforcement you get, so for instance, a really low tone, the rat will still bar press, the behavior will still occur, however, the rat will bar press less. So in this case, this is our stimulus generalization curve, And so far, this is your classic example of you train an organism to perform a response during a certain tone. It'll perform that response the most during that tone. And then as that discriminative stimulus gets different, as you present stimuli that are more and more different, the amount of behavior decreases and decreases and decreases on both sides. All right, any questions about that horribly fumbled explanation of stimulus generalization? We're all good? All right. All right, let's bring it around. So, stimulus generalization then leads into this idea of the peak shift effect. So, this is what occurs when an organism is only trained on the one discriminative stimulus. So, it only ever hears, in this case, the rat only ever hears that 2000 hertz tone, and then later you test it with other tones. We saw also in classical conditioning, and you can do the same thing in operational conditioning, where you can have discrimination training. And in discrimination training, you have some trials where you have a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, and then other trials, you have a discriminative stimulus for extinction. So on these other trials, we might present a discriminative stimulus for extinction. I believe I put in an 800 hertz tone. And when that is presented, a bar press leads to nothing. The rat doesn't get anything when that other tone is on. So 2000 hertz tone, rewarded for the bar press. 800 hertz tone, not rewarded for that bar press. So once again, just so you can have it up here with the actual symbols as well. Discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. Lever press is reinforced with food, that is a reinforcer. In discrimination training, you also add, in this case, I guess I did 1200. That's what I had there all along. So we got 1200 hertz tone, and when that tone is being presented, a lever press leads to nothing. It leads to no food. It leads to an extinction trial. So what happens to that generalization curve in this situation? What happens to that curve that we just saw originally when you've only heard the 2000 hertz tone? So if you've only heard the 2000 hertz tone, this will be your generalization curve. The highest proportion, or the highest response, the strongest response to the 2000 hertz tone, the one that was the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, and then a gradual decline as that stimulus gets different and different. This is the situation where the rat has only ever been trained on that 2000 hertz tone. As soon as you add in this extinction contingency, as soon as you train them in discrimination training, where they're reinforced for the 2000 hertz tone, and they are going through extinction for the 1200 hertz tone, two really interesting things happen. Number one, not surprisingly, the response for the 1200 hertz tone, the response that is not being reinforced, that goes down, that gets extinguished. That goes through the process of extinction. The rat will no longer bar press. However, the strange thing that happens is because of this pulling down of the response at the 1200 hertz tone, the discriminative stimulus for extinction, the tone that was originally trained as the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement no longer elicits the highest response from the rat. In fact, now the strongest response, the most bar presses per minute, comes from a tone that the rat has never heard before. And this is known as the peak shift effect. So it's called the peak shift because the peak of your generalization curve has now shifted, and importantly, unexpectedly, weirdly, it has shifted to a stimulus that the organism has never experienced before. So now you can think of this as this rat's desire, or their intention to bar press, if we can kind of anthropomorphize it a little bit, is to a stimulus that they have never ever heard before. So while they might think to themselves, you know what, if I hear that 2,000 hertz tone, I'm going to bar press for some food because that's what I've been trained on. But for some reason, I don't know, but for some reason, if I hear a 2,200 hertz tone, I would just go bananas and press that bar like crazy. Something about that 2,200 hertz tone just is going to emit more behavior, more of a response in this situation. So again, this is a peak shift, and it occurs once again because we've gone through extinction on this particular discriminative stimulus. That pulls that stimulus down and shifts the curve in the opposite direction. So now the highest peak is not at the stimulus that was originally trained, and that is the weirdness of the peak shift effect. All right. Any questions about that? Make sense so far? All right, let's take a look at Felix. So the peak shift effect, this shift of your generalization gradient away from the stimulus for extinction, beyond the stimulus for reinforcement, to a stimulus that has never before been presented, that is further removed from that particular extinction stimulus. So how can we use this to explain Felix Baumgartner and his desire to skydive from outer space, his desire to skydive from an elevation that nobody in the history of the world has skydived from before, at an elevation that he has never experienced before? Why would he have this desire to take a look at that elevation and say, you know what, something about that elevation just makes me want to go up there. Something about that elevation makes me want to do the behavior of skydiving. All right, so let's take a look at this in terms of the peak shift effect. Now, we're going to have to make a few assumptions to analyze this just for the simplicity of the analysis. All right, so this is in no way what I expect happens to Felix. However, just to make it simpler, we're going to kind of make a few assumptions. And the first assumption that we're going to have is, what would Felix have been like if he had only ever gone skydiving from one elevation? So here on the x-axis, we have elevation in meters. We've got 1,200 meters, 1,400 meters, 2,000 meters, so that's like 2 kilometers up. And then here we have the desire to go skydiving. All right, you can think of it as the desire to go skydiving. So the same way that you have a desire to go through an intersection when you see that green light, you have that kind of feeling that you want to do that behavior. Felix would have a feeling that he wanted to do skydiving, and the higher the line here, the more he had that desire, that feeling that he wanted to go skydiving from that particular elevation. Let's say that he only, just for simplicity purposes, only ever went skydiving from an elevation of 2,000 meters. That's the only elevation he goes, went up in the plane to 2,000 meters and then jumped out. One thing that would occur is that he would be reinforced for those for jumping out at those 2,000 meters. So he would have a 2,000 meter discriminative stimulus, and when he jumped, he would be reinforced, and he would be reinforced with excitement. All right, that's why people go skydiving, for that adrenaline rush, for that excitement. So he jumps out and he gets reinforced with excitement. So he does it again. Goes back up to 2,000 meters. Jumps up, gets reinforced with excitement. So he comes back the next week, goes up 2,000 meters, jumps up and gets reinforced with excitement. And he does this over and over and over and over again, always jumping at 2,000 meters. In that case, 2,000 meters would be his discriminative stimulus, and his maximum desire to jump would be for 2,000 meters. So friends of him called him up on the weekend, and they said, Felix, we're going skydiving this weekend. You want to come with us? And he said, how high are you going? And they said, we're going to 2,000 meters. He would say, heck yeah, I'm in. I'm going to go. That's my preferred level. If, on the other hand, they said, you know what, let's try something different this weekend. Let's go to 2,200 meters. Yeah, let's shake it up a little bit, right? If they say, let's go to 2,200 meters, Felix is going to say, well, okay, I mean, I would prefer 2,000, but I'll do 2,200, right? Never experienced it before, will still do 2,200, but still would prefer 2,000. And if they said, you know what, we don't have the gas, we don't got the money this time around to take the plane up that high, let's do 1,200 instead. In that case, you would say something like, well, man, 1,200, I guess I'll go. I mean, I still have a little bit of desire to go skydiving at 1,200. I really wish we were going to 2,000. That's my preferred height. That's the height I've always skydived at. But I will indulge you guys and I will do 1,200. I still have a discriminative stimulus generalization that I will be reinforced with excitement if I jump at 1,200. All right, any questions about that analysis so far? Okay, that's if Felix only ever jumped at 2,000 meters. That doesn't happen. Usually people have a variety of different experiences. Usually they go and experience things across a variety of different situations. So what would happen is occasionally Felix would go jumping at 1,200, and occasionally he would go jumping at 2,000. And what would happen at that 1,200 jump is that he would jump and he would not get excitement. It would be too low. It would be too boring. It would be like going on one of those kiddie roller coasters after you're an adult. It's like, well, it's just not that fun. It's not that exciting. I remember I took my nephew to Canada's Wonderland. It's the amusement park that we have up in Toronto. And they had this amusement ride that was literally you just sit in a thing that looks like a rocket ship and you went around in a circle at about that speed. And for me, that was a discriminative stimulus for no reinforcement. I was not having a good time. I was glad I was with him, but the ride was not enjoyable. For him, it was a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. He literally said, we, the first time that we went around. And I know it's a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement because it increased his probability that he would do that behavior in the future. Because when I told him that we had to exit the ride because our turn was over, and the ride operator came by and said, there's no line, you guys can stay as long as you want, we did. Not as long as I wanted, as long as he wanted. But anyways, analogy. Felix Baumgartner jumps out at 1,200, right? Jumps out of the plane and he's like, I guess I'll pull my chute. It's the most boring day ever. 1,200 jump, no excitement. 2,000 jump, woohoo, excitement, adrenaline rush. 1,200 jump, no excitement. Let's say that that's what's occurring, much like my ride on that, my experience on that ride, not reinforcing. If this is the situation where he's jumping from 2,000 meters, having a great time, jumping from 1,200 meters, not being reinforced, that 1,200 meters becomes a discriminative stimulus for extinction. And what happens is that his desire or the probability of his behavior of jumping out of 1,200 meters, that goes down to 0. So after a few jumps at 1,200 where he has no fun whatsoever, Felix, next time his friends phone him up, they're going to say, hey, do you want to go skydiving? And he's like, what height? And they're going to say 1,200, and he's going to say, no, thank you. There's nothing there for me. I don't enjoy it. I'm going to pass it up. I'm down to 0 in terms of how much I'm going to do that behavior. So then if they say, well, what do you want to go? How high do you want to go now? Because this 1,200 has gone through extinction, his preference now, his generalization curve has been shifted. So if they were to say, all right, instead of 1,200, what height do you want to go at? Now he would say, you know what, I usually do 2,000. That's my height that I usually go with. But for now, for some reason, I don't know why, I'm feeling 2,200. Let's take it up to 2,200. That's my preferred level of elevation. That is my new peak for my discrimination stimulus for reinforcement. So his preference has now peaked to want to jump at 2,200, even though he has never jumped from 2,200 previously. Does that analysis make sense? Okay, so now his new peak is 2,200. But we know that he's not just going to skydive from 2,200 for the rest of his life. His friends are going to call him up. He's going to have other opportunities. And they're going to say, hey, how about we go to 1,600? How about that? He's going to jump out at 1,600 and he's going to not have a good time. He's going to jump out. It's going to be boring. He's going to be falling 1,600 meters. He's going to say, oh, why did I get out of bed? And his desire for 1,600 is going to go through extinction because it's not being reinforced. And that's going to dive down. If he experiences 1,800, again, if it's not reinforcing, if it's not exciting, that's going to dive down. And then what's going to happen is that his new peak is now going to become, once again, not his preferred, and a new peak that's even further away from these extinction areas is now going to become his new preference. So if he skydives at 1,400 and 1,600 and has a boring time, now all of a sudden 2,400 is going to be his new favorite, even though he's never skydived from that level before. And then we go through the new process where now 2,600 becomes his new favorite. And then we go through the new process where he's bored with lower elevations, and now 2,800 becomes a new favorite. 3,000 becomes a new favorite. And eventually they're going to phone him up and they're going to say, hey, Felix, we're going skydiving. You get to pick the elevation. What do you want to try? And he's going to say, you know what? Outer space kind of feels right for me. And they're going to say, you've never skydove from outer space. Skydive? I don't know what the... You never went skydiving from outer space. But the desire is going to be there. It's going to elicit that skydiving behavior the most because of this peak shift phenomenon. So his desire to go skydiving from outer space can be explained by the fact that he had boring times at low elevations, and that pushed his preferred high elevation, that pushed that discriminative stimulus for reinforcement further and further away from those low elevations until eventually he was skydiving from outer space. All right, any questions about that? All right, let's go to physical attraction. So, once again, much like Felix Baumgartner, most people do not have a reinforcing experience with these types of physical specimens because the reason why they are sexiest man alive, the reason why they are on the cover of Sports Illustrated is probably partially because of their rarity. So why is it that we are highly attracted to individuals that fit this, this framework, even though we have never been reinforced for going out with individuals like this? So before we begin this analysis, we are going to have to take a callous look at part of what dating is all about. So what dating is all about is basically spending time together. All right, spend time together. That's the behavior that you're trying to reinforce, right? That's what you're trying to accomplish. Nobody ever goes out on a date and says to themselves, oh wow, I really like this person. I hope that as a result of what we're doing here tonight, they never want to see me again. I hope that the desire to spend time together goes down to zero. No, you're saying to yourself, wow, I hope they really want, to spend more time with me. I hope they really get excited about spending time with me. So what you do is you take the time, you take the behavior of spending time together, that's why you go out on dates, and you reinforce that with, we're just going to put fun. Some sort of enjoyment, right? You go to a nice restaurant, you have a good time. You go see a good movie, you have a good time. You spend time together, they get reinforced with having a good time. Hopefully, you will spend time together again. Hopefully the desire to spend time together will increase. That's why people take time to plan a date. Because you don't want to go through extinction. You don't want to go spend time together, and at the end of it, you're like, well, did you have a good time? And you're like, it's all right. It's not a great time. It's not a horrible time. I basically went through extinction this time with you, if they ever talk like that. But anyways, that's what you don't want to do. So what happens is that there's certain discriminative stimuli for spending time together that leads to fun. There's certain discriminative stimuli for spending time together that lead to extinction. And what you're hoping is that you will become that discriminative stimulus for spending time together for fun. So that when they think about you, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about, so-and-so. Well, you know what? I want to see them. That discriminative stimulus leads to emit that behavior of spending time together because I'm being reinforced for that particular behavior. I feel like a Charlie Brown special. And that is what dating is all about. But anyway, so that's one of the bases of dating. So what else happens? Well, in addition to you, there are other things that are discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, and these are other things that are about you, right? Characteristics that you might have, right? Or if you're dating somebody else, characteristics that they might have. So this is the basis of what happens when we start to feel attracted and why people start to feel attracted possibly to extreme physical examples like this, even though they might never have experienced those particular physical stimuli. So, how do we analyze this? Well, we're going to once again take a look at discrimination training, once again take a look at the peak shift effect. So, we're going to have a rating scale here, and I'm just going to call this hotness. So, this is basically, and I'm doing this to make it general, this is whatever a person might find attractive in another person. And the reason that I'm just calling it hotness is because people differ on this scale. Some people like tall individuals, right? The taller the better, right? Tall, dark, and handsome. That's one of the things that we have. Some people don't want somebody that's too tall. Some people like muscular individuals. Some people think people get, they're too muscular. Some people like lots of makeup. Some people hate makeup, right? So whatever it is that we'll make it personal, that you particularly enjoy, this is more of it, and this is less of it over here. And then here we have approach behavior. So you can think of this in terms of why would you ever be attracted to somebody for a physical trait to begin with, right? Why would you ever approach somebody? Why would you be at a party and take a look across the room at somebody and say, you know what? I'm going to go talk to that individual because I want to get to know them better. Maybe we'll go out. Maybe I'll get it, get a number or something. Anyways, so that's approach behavior. The higher the bar or the higher the line, the more likely you are to go and engage, go and approach somebody. Literally, you find that person more attractive, right? So think about that word, attractive. It literally means that person attracts you. To say that I find that person attractive means that I literally, like a planet in the solar system, want to get closer to that person. It's kind of like gravity. All right. So we got the setup. Whatever trait you particularly find attractive, whatever physical trait you find attractive, there's probably a certain amount of it that you find the most attractive, right? So when people say, "Oh, I really like a tall individual," right? Tall, dark, and handsome. Nobody's picturing in their mind a 9-foot, huge individual. They're thinking of a certain level of tallness. So that's what we start off right here. And let's say, once again, for educational purposes, that you are the most shallow person in the world, and you will only date people right there, right? So we'll make it height-wise. Let's say that your preferred level is 6 feet tall, and somebody comes to you and says, "Ooh, I met this new person. I want to introduce you to them. I think you guys would really hit it off." And you're like, "How tall are they?" And they're like, "Oh, they're 6'1". And you're like, "Pass, hard pass, no thank you." It's like, "Oh, I know this other person. Oh, really? How tall are they? 5'10". Hard pass. "Oh, I know this third person. What's their height? 6 feet tall?" "Oh, yes." All right. Let's say that that's your super shallow lifestyle. In that case, you would go out, spend time together, you would have fun, and then that level of hotness, that 2,000 for height, becomes a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. So let's say that this is the first time you're dating and you're super shallow, you're only going out with people that are 6 feet tall. after a certain number of dates, you would have fun with people that are 6 feet tall. What's going to happen then is later on, when you're asked about that person that's 6 feet 2, when your friend says, oh, I know this new person, I think you guys would be great together. I know it didn't work out with your previous 6 foot tall partner there, but I know this person that's 6 foot 2. At this point, because of the generalization curve, you would say, all right, you know what, 6 foot 2, I'll give him a chance. Right? I'll go out with them. I would prefer it if they were 2 inches shorter, but 6 foot 2, okay. And if they said something like, well, I know this other person, they're 5 foot 6. How about then? You'd be like, well, 5 foot 6. Okay, not my preferred, much lower attraction, much lower desire, for example, to go out on a date, but you're still willing, right? It's not a deal breaker. You're still willing to go out with that particular individual. That's what would occur if you only ever went out with individuals that were 6 feet tall. We don't do that. We go out with a variety. Hopefully we go out with a variety of individuals. So what happens? Well, just because of random occurrences, right? Just because of some dates are going to be good, some dates are going to be bad, you might go out with that 5 foot 6 individual and you might have a horrible time, right? 5 foot 6, we'll put that as the 1200 level of hotness. You spend time together and for whatever reason you just don't have a good time, right? It didn't work out. In that case, what's going to happen is that 5 foot 6 is going to become a discriminative stimulus for extinction. And the next time that you see somebody who's 5 foot 6, you are not going to have any desire to go out with them. If you see somebody at a party and you're like, oh, who's that over there? Oh, what are they, 5 foot 6? Hard pass, no thank you. Because I have previously not had good times with people that were 5 foot 6. However, because of the peak shift phenomenon, even though you only ever dated people that were 6 feet tall, now that you've had that horrible experience with somebody who's 5 foot 6, your preference for a height will now shift to a new height that you have never experienced before, and that's going to be now 6 foot 2. So now all of a sudden, even though you would never give people 6 foot 2 a chance before, now all of a sudden they seem attractive to you. And you might say to yourself, you know what, I don't know what it is about that person, I've never noticed them before. I used to think they were too tall, but now they just kind of look tall enough, 6 foot 2, right where it should be. And if it just happens by chance, or maybe, by the lifestyle that you choose, maybe there's certain things that you can't do with shorter individuals, the rides at the fair or something, I don't know. But if for whatever reason you date a few short individuals and you don't have a good time with those short individuals, what's going to happen is that your preference is going to shift to taller and taller and taller individuals. And you will not have to experience or get reinforced for spending time together with those tall individuals before they become a discriminative stimulus that makes you want to spend time with those taller individuals. And this is part of, not the entire story, but this is part of the reason why we find extreme examples of physical characteristics oftentimes to be attractive. This is why usually the people on the cover of magazines do not look like your everyday person on the cover of magazines. Even your everyday person on the cover of magazines, even when they're doing one of those articles where they're like, oh, this is your everyday typical, runway fashion model beauty, they're still the upper echelons of that mold that they're fitting into. And the reason for that, again, is this peak shift effect. We are attracted to more and more extreme examples if we have had poor experiences with examples from lower amounts of that particular characteristic. So again, this works for any physical trait that we might find attractive. So for example, muscularity. How muscular do you like a particular individual to be? Most people have some preferred amount, right? Most people have some, you don't want them to be too unmuscular, but you don't want them to be too massively muscular. There's a certain amount that we find attractive. And again, we don't only ever interact with that particular amount. It's only the super shallow people that are like, well, what body fat do they have and how much lean body mass do they have? Because I have this little box that I need my people to fit into. If that's the case, then this would be our discrimination curve. However, we typically have a wide variety of different people that we date. And again, if you have poor experiences with people that are lower in muscularity, if you take them rock climbing, for example, and it just turns out that they can't even do a pull-up, so you have a poor time. You got to stay at the bottom of the base camp, and everybody else is enjoying the rock climbing experience, and you're sitting there because the person you brought can't do a pull-up. That's going to be an extinction procedure. So that is going to decrease your desire for less muscularity, but it's going to increase your desire for more muscularity. And if that happens with a few other less muscular individuals, you are going to shift more and more and more towards higher muscular individuals. So, for example, Hafthor Bjornsson, all right, that is his wife. Okay, proportionally, that's his daughter, right? But that is his wife. This guy he won the World's Strongest Man at one point. That's him on Game of Thrones. He's huge. He's 6'9". I think, just kind of looking at him, at least upper 300 pounds, probably, low 400. But at some point, she saw him and she said, okay, right? At some point she saw him and she said, yes, I will date that individual. I am somewhat attracted to them, right? Because let's face it, you need a sort of baseline level of attractiveness before somebody has a chance, right? He was here. If she had poor experiences with shorter guys, with less muscular guys, for whatever reason, if she had those experiences, and again, it could just be random, maybe they just took her to a movie that they thought was great and she thought was horrible and she had a bad time, it doesn't matter. Whatever the reason, if less muscularity and lower height went through extinction, higher muscularity and larger would become the discriminative stimulus for reinforcement, to the point where before, that might have been too tall, too big, just too much, right? Not attracted to the person at all. But after those experiences and that shift in your peak shift, all of a sudden, now that attractiveness is enough where that approach behavior will occur. And again, because of those extinction procedures with less muscular individuals. All right, let's do a little bit of a thought exercise. So we've seen a couple of examples here. We've seen it for skydiving elevation. We've seen it for muscularity. We've seen it for really any sort of example of hotness. So now let's go back once again to the idea of the bad boy and the attraction that our society has towards the bad boy. So we already saw 7 sexy songs about liking bad boys. We've already encountered the song Tommy, about a boy who shifts from being polite and courteous to being a bad boy, and now they love Tommy more than they did then. And just in case you think this is only pop culture references, just I think 2 weeks ago, a new study came out that shows that women are more attracted to men that show psychopathic tendencies. Right, so like the ultimate bad boy, the psychopath. So, where did I highlight this? Let's get in there. So the findings indicate that psychopathy may include features that make men appear as more attractive romantic partners, despite having a reduced interest in committed relationships. So these psychopathy is a discriminative stimulus. Something about them is a discriminative stimulus that is indicating that if you spend time together, you will be reinforced. If a person is a psychopath, if you spend time together, you will probably be abused, but for some reason, it's become a discriminative stimulus for reinforcement. So this is the actual article that was published. So if you're interested, psychopathy and the induction of desire, formulating and testing an evolutionary hypothesis, and just so you can see the actual results there. Those results show that psychopathy was related to psychosexuality and generating higher desirability ratings for women after controlling for men's physical attractiveness. So it's not like psychopaths are more narcissistic, it's not like they're taking better care of themselves. Even after you control for physical attractiveness, there's still something about the psychopath that is attractive. So what might it be about a psychopath that women are finding attractive?
Like a level of narcissism?
Oh, where were you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead. Yep.
No, I was just thinking of the connection of like levels of narcissism.
Can you elaborate?
Like they make themselves attractive to people?
So they do make themselves attractive to people. That's the general result here. But they did control for physical attractiveness.
Oh.
So it's not as if they can be more physically attractive to individuals. And narcissism, typically, I would say our society finds it unattractive. Usually, we never say that somebody is a narcissist in a good way.
Right.
It's typically because they have overinflated images of themselves. So, any other ideas? Yep.
I was gonna say like the idea of like kind of like possessiveness, but at first it comes across as like wanting to like spend time together or something, but then it can like turn into like possessiveness, like not wanting to like wanting to just be together, just like two people, but then it turns into like you can't go out, you can't do this.
Okay, so possessiveness is a possible stimulus feature. It's a possible feature of psychopaths. So let me write some of these down so I don't forget it. So we got possessiveness. I'm going to use all the S's. There we go. All right, yep.
I was talking to my sister the other day, and we were just kind of talking about how the difference between like an obsessed stalker and like a really romantic guy is whether or not we're attracted to him.
Okay.
So like a guy, any guy that calls you 1,000 times or just shows up at your house, if you like him, it's romantic. If you don't like him, he's a creep.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have, so this is, I think, more of a clue than a sort of explanation here. Because once again, in this study, the real interesting thing about the study is that they controlled for physical attractiveness. So if it's a physical thing that you're attracted to, then that would be factored out of this analysis. But it is a good point that a lot of behaviors that are horrible behaviors to have in a relationship are just too much of a good behavior to have in a relationship, right? So like possessiveness is a good behavior to have in a relationship up until it gets to an abusive point, right? So if you go up to your significant other and you say, oh, do you feel like we're a couple? Do you feel like we belong together? Would you miss me if I was gone? And they're like, no, what else? You wouldn't sit there going, oh, it makes me feel warm, right? You want them to be a little bit possessive. You want them to be a little bit like, no, we're together, and it's you and me, and you're mine, and I'm yours, and we have this amount of possessiveness. There's a certain level that's good. There's too much of it, though. There's too much of it in terms of I need to know exactly where you are at all points in time. And I didn't like the way that you were talking to that other person. And you're like, well, they were the checkout person, and they asked me if I wanted to pay by credit card or not. It's like, well, I don't like, you're mine, and don't forget it. Too much. So that's the kind of idea. So we got possessiveness. Yep.
Confidence. Like they can be super confident, and that's a good thing after a point.
So we got confidence. Yep.
It could be the P-shift effect. So they dated people who were normal and they didn't have a good time or something went wrong. I would say normal, but not
psychopaths.
Yeah,
yep.
not psychopaths. And they had not the greatest time, so that makes them want something that's more, someone that's more psychopathic.
Okay, so, yeah,
Like attention to detail.
attention to detail.
Like usually they're very like extremely observant. And,
Okay, well, I'll write that because that's a little shorter. So they're observant. They have attention to detail, right? So you go out and you get your hair done, and they will notice, right? That's nice. It's nice when you go out and put in an effort and somebody notices, but it can be too much, right? If they're overly observant, if they become too, again, kind of obsessed. So all of those are potential discriminative stimuli that indicate spend time together and you'll have fun, right? All of those are discriminative stimuli for you go into a relationship and you will be reinforced. So a certain amount of possessiveness is a discriminative stimuli that is indicating that you'll be reinforced for that relationship. A certain amount of confidence, right, is a discriminative stimulus for if you hang out with a person with a certain amount of confidence, they will have, you'll be reinforced for that level of confidence. So all of those were good suggestions. I think the one that I brought up has something to do, a little bit to do with confidence, but also has another kind of example, assertiveness. But really, you can put any of these on this scale, and you can put any factor that makes a psychopath somewhere on, you can make a scale for anything. So we have assertiveness, people that are way too assertive, people that aren't assertive enough. You can put possessiveness, people who are way too possessive, people not possessive enough. You could have confidence, right? People that are way overconfident versus people that are not confident enough. Observant, way over observant, not observant enough. So any of these kind of characteristics of a psychopath, you could do this similar analysis with it. So we'll take a look at assertiveness, but basically they would all work the same. There's a certain amount of assertiveness that is like a healthy amount of assertiveness. And again, people differ on how assertive they are. So here you would have kind of people that stand up for themselves, for their own rights, but are not too, too assertive. Over here, you'd have people like Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy. So everybody saw, how many people saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy? All right, so some people know what I'm talking about. But there was this character, Rocket Raccoon, and he was trying to figure out what was legal and what wasn't. And he was saying, if I see somebody and they have something, is it fine if I murder them for it? And the guy was like, the policeman was like, no, you can't. And he goes, no, he goes, but I really want it. It's like, you're not understanding, I really want it. He's super assertive, right? He's like, hey, I'm going to stand up for myself by taking whatever I want, and I don't care what you think. Too much, right? And then you have people that aren't very assertive, and these are the ones where, they just get walked over, they don't stand up for themselves, and there's too little assertiveness. So, once again, if you only dated people with that middle level of assertiveness, this would be your discrimination, your generalization curve. So if somebody said, you know what, somebody ever said, hey, I know this person, and he's a 2,000 on assertiveness. No, so if you ever met somebody and they were assertive this amount, you would be highly attracted to them. And if they said, hey, you want to go out sometime? You'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I have a lot of approach behavior or willing to do approach behavior for that level of assertiveness. If you meet somebody and they're a little too assertive, right? Maybe just a little bit beyond the assertiveness that you've been reinforced for going out with. If they're a little over assertive, you might think to yourself when they ask you out, well, this person a little too pushy, a little too assertive, but I'm still willing to go out with them. I wish they were a little bit more easygoing, but I'm still willing to go out with them. And then if you met another person that was a complete pushover, you might say to yourself, wow, this person really needs assertiveness training. This person really needs to not be such a pushover, but I still have this desire for approach behavior. I still have this immediate approach behavior, so I'll still go out with this individual. When you go out with that non-assertive individual, What could occur when you're spending time together that makes it no fun whatsoever? What could occur if you are out on a date with somebody who's not very assertive and that date becomes a trial for extinction? Mm-hmm.
If you're out on a date with a pushover and another guy hits on you, and the pushover just kind of like buries his head in his lap while the guy is flirting with you.
Yeah. So you get unwanted attention from an individual in a social situation, and you kind of look to the person that you took out out with you on that date, and you're like, "Are you gonna say something?" And they're like, "No, I'm just gonna leave you to be," and that's and that would be a bad experience, right? That would be not fun. That would be an extinction trial. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
I guess a smaller one would be like if you appreciate a guy ordering for you and
Mm-hmm.
he just wants you to order for him, you're like, no.
Oh yeah. So if you're like, well, you're trying to have a conversation, and you're like, well, what do you think looks good? On this menu, what are you going to have? And they're like, I don't know. What do you want me to have? And you're like, well, what do you mean? What do I want you to have? It's like, I'll eat whatever you want me to eat. That's fine. And think about that horrible situation if their food comes and it's wrong. And you're like, well, you're not going to enjoy that. You should send it back. And they're like, no, I'll be fine. And you're like, no, you're allergic to peanuts. You told me that. You got to go to the hospital. And they're like, no, I'm fine. I'll just eat the peanuts. I don't want to cause a scene, right? Lack of assertiveness can lead to a very poor experience. So we won't go into too many examples of that, but you can see how going out with somebody who has a certain lack of assertiveness would lead to a not fun event. So you spent time together, was not reinforced. That lack of assertiveness becomes a discriminative stimulus for extinction. What that means is that the next pushover that you meet at a social event, when they ask you out, you're going to say, no, thank you. You're going to say, I'm not interested. You're not going to go out with them. You're not going to give them a chance. What this has done, however, is had taken your previous level of assertiveness, your previous preferred level, and it has now pushed it further. So now after these poor experiences, this extinction procedure with somebody who wasn't assertive, all of a sudden you now are attracted to people who are more assertive than you were before. And if you continue to have poor experiences with individuals who are not assertive, what's going to happen is that your peak is going to continue to shift so that higher and higher levels of assertiveness become more and more attractive. And as much as this occurs for any of these characteristics that a psychopath might have, that's why when you see those characteristics in another individual, you might have never dated a psychopath, but you'll still find them attractive. There's still going to be something about them. You're just going to look at them and say, you know what? I've never been with a person that assertive, or that confident, or that possessive, or that observant. But there's just something about them that I find highly attractive. For some reason, I like this psychopath. I like this bad boy. And just again to let you know, just give you one more example of this. And it's a weird behavior when you think about it, but it makes total sense when you understand the kind of psychological underpinnings. So the fact that people like certain extreme things that they've never experienced is baffling until you can understand this peak shift effect. So just to give you that one last example, I don't know if I can see that some of you remember this guy. All right, so his name was Meeks. He went viral, looks like about 3 years ago when this mugshot went popular. He's actually, I think he's modeling right now, but people found him extremely attractive. People found him extremely approachable. Women in particular were trying to get in contact with him, were trying to write him letters. And while he is attractive, he went viral partly, I think, because of his criminal tendencies, partly because of this peak shift effect, because there are individuals who are attracted to criminals. You can look up the psychology on this. pen pals, you know, they fall in love with criminals, and people started falling in love with this guy. And just so you know, he was charged with robbery, with physical injury to a child, and he was convicted of federal charges of being a felon in possession of a firearm and grand theft. All of those things, massively assertive, right? Grand theft, possession of a firearm, right? It's highly assertive to go into a bank and say, give me all your money. But why would you ever be attracted to that much? Well, if you had poor experiences over here, it pushes your peak to more extreme and extreme situations. So when you see somebody who is clearly massively assertive, you might say to yourself, you know what, I've never dated a criminal. I've never dated somebody as violent as they are. But you know what, something about them. There's just something about that, oh yeah, that was my last point. There's just something about that individual that I find particularly attractive. All right, so the last thing I want to mention about the peak shift effect is that it goes both ways. So we've only been looking at it increasing towards this way, but if you ever did go out with that individual, right? If you ever did have that pen pal that was a convict, and then they finally get out, and you're like, oh great, we can finally go out, we can finally go to dinner. If you spend time together and you are not reinforced, right? If you spend time together and they try to rob the restaurant that you go to and you're on the run, and that is not a reinforcing time, what's going to happen is that you're going to go through extinction for that particular level of assertiveness. And then what that's going to do is it's going to push your peak back the other way, where those lower amounts of assertiveness are going to get more and more attractive. So if you ever do have that poor experience with somebody who's too assertive, too possessive, too muscular, too tall, too observant, too confident, whatever was too much, your peak will shift towards the other way. So all of a sudden, you might say to yourself, you know what, I never really noticed this pushover in my office, but something about them, you know, the way that they crumble under pressure, I just find extremely attractive right now. And you know, you might give them a chance. All right, any questions about that or comments, analyses? All right, so what we're going to do next time is we're going to start taking a look at punishment and continue on with this look at punishment and discrimination. We'll take a look at the different types of punishment, and then we'll also take a look at some of the things to know about how to use punishment. So unlike reinforcement, punishment comes with side effects that are oftentimes non-desirable side effects. So before you use punishment, before you put people in timeout or take away their toys or verbally say, you know, no, 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 when you're a boss, before you start using punishment procedures to keep your employees in line, these are all things that you need to know if you want to use punishment, because it is an effective form of changing behavior. You'll remember that Dr. Fox had punishment in his treatment of Harry, so it's not that it's ineffective, but you have to be careful with it. There are side effects that you need to be aware of, and we're going to take a look at all those next time. So if there's no final comments or anything, we'll wrap it up for today.